A few weeks ago, I asked Dallas-based US doctor Umar Birni, who was in Gaza when we spoke, if what he was seeing there was the worst humanitarian crisis of his career. He answered, probably close to, before then citing his trip to Sudan 3 months earlier as the worst thing he'd ever seen. And I know it's hard to imagine that what is happening in Sudan rivals the ugliness of what's happening in occupied Gaza. But what's really terrifying to know is that this is all happening in Sudan away from the media and social media spotlights. After the country's plunge into civil war in 2023, with fighting breaking out between the country's military and a powerful militia known as the Rapid Support Forces, or RSF, the situation for people on the ground went from bad to dangerous to outright despicable. From extrajudicial killings to imprisonment to torture, more than 30 million people in Sudan urgently need humanitarian assistance, according to the United Nations. That's more than half of the country's population. Cities like Al-Fasher, the state capital of Darfur, have endured over a year of siege by the RSF. A year. But it's not just bullets and bombs genociding the people of Sudan. It's also starvation. In a city like Tawila in northern Darfur, people survive with an average of just 3 litres of water per day, which is less than half the emergency minimum threshold of 7.5 litres needed per person per day. Elsewhere, people have resorted to eating animal feed as a means of survival. Oh, and last December, a famine was declared by the same people at the IPC who just declared a famine in Gaza. For far too long, we, the West, the media, all of us, have forgotten the people of Sudan. Joining me now in studio to discuss what some are calling the forgotten war, the forgotten genocide, is Niemat Ahmadi, leader of the Darfur Women Action Group. And joining me remotely is Nesrine Malik, an award-winning British Sudanese columnist with The Guardian. Thank you both for coming on Mehdi Unfiltered. Let me start with you, Niemat. I'm assuming you still have family, friends, communities back in Sudan. How are they faring right now? How are they doing?
Unfortunately, I can't even begin to describe how they're doing. As you mentioned, Al-Fasher has been under siege for more than a year. People are left with nothing. As I speak to you, people are dying in silence. We have family, we have relatives, we have friends, people we know. People are trapped, suffering hunger, lack of water, lack of access to health, and all survival means because of precisely the rapid support forces cut the city off, prevented fuel from entering into Al-Fasher, preventing food, and even those who ventured to flee on foot were killed and raped. I have an aunt who has been sick for well over a year, and she couldn't leave. So my other aunt remained because they cannot leave her behind because she can't walk. This is simply one person, but many more. Their stories are horrifying.
It is horrifying just hearing you speak about what's happening. Nesrine, you and I spoke over a year ago about the situation in Sudan. Back then, you told me that it was very hard to get information out from Sudan to paint just how bad things are. How bad have things gotten a year later? Is it any easier to get information or news out of Sudan?
It's easier, but also harder because the theatre of war has expanded so dramatically in Sudan over the past year. And I actually can't believe it's been a year since we spoke. 2 things have shifted. One is the capital city, Khartoum, had been liberated from the RSF, which means that there's much more information arising from Khartoum and sort of broader parts of eastern Sudan and the regions of Al Jazeera, to which people are now returning. So there's more information, much more information and much more transparency about what went down basically under the siege of the RSF over the past, say, year and a half. And horrific stories are emerging from there and the circumstances that people lived in for so long and the terror under which they survived under the reign of the RSF. So there's parts of Sudan for which there is much more information, much more access. Lots more journalists have been allowed in and have come back and given us a sort of apocalyptic description of what went down in the capital city. But then there are other parts of Sudan to which Niemat alluded to, which are completely blockaded. All that we get are snippets of social media, videos. People have taken videos sort of undercover, under huge risk, to bring us these stories. And so even the kind of patchiness of the information that we're getting in is creating a fractured and inconsistent view of what the war is. People are seeing refugees returning to parts of Sudan. Something like 500,000 people have returned to Khartoum, I think, in the month of July alone. And so it looks like life is sort of semi-returning to normal in some parts, but in other parts, it's a total crucible of suffering, starvation, fear, and killings. And so that profile of information is also making it difficult to communicate a clear thematic story for the world's attention to be galvanized around.
Liking this video? Then don't just watch. Hit like, share, and subscribe. And tap the bell so you never miss a video or live show. But if you want early access to exclusive content, then you have to head to Zeteo.com and subscribe now. You'll be supporting fearless, independent journalism. Niemat, Nesrine mentions that the RSF is now out of Khartoum. The killing there has not stopped, though. Just a few weeks ago, emergency lawyers, an NGO in Khartoum, released a statement accusing the army of detaining people using fabricated charges under inhumane conditions. It added, some are released into the streets in a severely deteriorated physical and psychological state. Others are found dead or die under torture. From what you're hearing, has the situation in Khartoum improved since the army took back the city from the RSF?
Well, there is mixed information, but to say the least, people are returning.
Yeah.
So that kind of an indicator that I cannot refute.
Yeah.
Some people have returned, but returning to what? The situation is horrifying.
Yeah.
The city needs cleaning, safety and security remain the biggest issue, but all those who have been forced or expelled from Khartoum, they were forced into going into Darfur from Al Jazeera, from Khartoum, from other areas. So even though the Rapid Support Forces has never stopped killing people in Darfur, but now the number increased. All the effort that was put in Khartoum and other area was now forced into Darfur, and that has exacerbated the situation. We have seen mass killing. Attack on internal displaced camps. I've never seen something like the attack that happened in Zamzam camp. This is a camp was created over the last 2 years. This is a camp from 20 years ago. Imagine, these people survived the Darfur genocide 20 years ago. They made home for themselves. They lived for more than 20 years
and now it's
in a makeshift shelter. And now they are deprived even from that terrible situation that they just adapted to be in. I mean, many people have died in silence. People walk into Tawila, and when they come there, women will remove their children from their back, only to realize that these children are dead. People fall on the street because they can't walk. So comparing with like what happened in Khartoum was horrifying, and it could mount to war crimes. But what is happening in Darfur is very systematic.
And
it's deliberate.
You yourself, correct me if I'm wrong, are a survivor of genocide in Darfur.
Absolutely.
And you now run the Darfur Women Action Group. How traumatic is it for you? As you mentioned, 20 years ago, a lot of people did survive the genocide. A lot of people were killed horrifically. But the people who survived it, to go through it all again 20 years later, what is that like?
It cannot be described. For me, I can't begin to imagine for the people who remain there. We are able to speak, we are able to do whatever possible to help, but there are people who were just hoping to go home. They were hoping to be able to farm. They were able to just hoping and dreaming to reunite with their families. Unfortunately, that's not the case right now. So I do think the world lost the sense of humanity and the indifference. And now we are normalizing genocide because it does not make headlines anymore, while millions of people are dying in silence. in Darfur today, because the same Janjaweed, the same militias that were, they killed the people of Darfur, where the world showed outrage back then, the same groups who are killing the people today, and unfortunately the same tribe who are selectively, systematically targeted on ethnic basis. And what is really horrifying and shocking is that this time around, the perpetrator will videotape, record the messages. Even now in Al-Fashir, they're poking fun of those eating animal feathers. And,
disgusting.
And they're like killing people and videotaping them and showing them. So you can imagine how that feels.
I can't imagine how it feels. That's why it's shocking. And I'm so sorry. And I appreciate you taking time to come and talk to us today about what is happening, because as you say, people are dying in silence, and some of us are trying to break through that silence. Nesrine, the country's military leader, Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, he said recently that rebels have ruined the country. There's no room to coexist with them. So is Sudan now in a situation where it's total victory or nothing? And I live in the US, where Donald Trump keeps talking about negotiated settlements in Ukraine or in Gaza or wherever else. Can there be a negotiated diplomatic solution to what is happening in Sudan? Is that even an option? Who would be the mediator?
It doesn't seem like it's an option at the moment. Just picking up on what Niemat said, the vengefulness of the RSF and the long history that they bring with them to these parts of Sudan, to Darfur, the kind of sectarian and tribal killings that have been going on for 20 years, these are almost separate to the war. This is the sort of our RSF's own particular configuration of racial and tribal hatreds that they're enacting. And there is a sharpness and an edge to that that feels completely disconnected from any strategic purpose. Like that, there is a sense that some of this violence is for its own sake, rather than to pressurize people into any sort of negotiated solution. And so, unfortunately, the sense of the war over the past year or so is that it's in a tailspin at the moment. There are so many parties involved, maximalist positions on both sides, and also a complete lack of leverage, both in terms of interest on the part of parties like the US or the EU that can potentially impose any kind of pressure on the different proxy interlocutors, and also a lack of willingness. So there isn't even a sense of interest in what is going on in Sudan at the moment. And so, unfortunately, and I hate to say this, I'm somebody who always tries to think in terms of, if these accounts come out, if people do understand what's happening in Sudan and scramble, especially if it's a war that this particular kind of ethnic killing has before galvanized people's attention. This is something people know and are familiar with, and try to stop before. It does seem, unfortunately, at the moment, that there is no scenario of negotiated settlement. Everyone is bedded in. The backers of the RSF, particularly United Arab Emirates, that is the main sort of funder and supporter of this group, is really digging its heels in. And it just looks like everyone is going for all or nothing. But from the start, it was clear, from the start of this war, it was clear that no party had the ability to entirely defeat the other decisively.
Nesrine, you mentioned the UAE. In March, Sudan filed a case with the International Court of Justice against the United Arab Emirates, accusing it of violating the Genocide Convention by arming the Rapid Support Forces, the RSF. The UAE denies it, saying it's a publicity stunt, the ICJ case. In May, the ICJ dismissed the case, saying when the UAE signed up to the Genocide Convention, it inserted a reservation stating it would not allow disputes about the interpretation or fulfillment of the convention to be resolved at the ICJ, which I wonder why even join the ICJ then. But what is your view of the UAE's role in this conflict, and which other outside powers are also accused of having Sudanese blood on their hands?
Well, there are many involved. They're involved in different capacities. Some are supporting the Sudanese armed forces, and some are supporting the RSF. But the biggest supporter, the biggest funder of either party is the United Arab Emirates. And it has sort of the country has taken it upon itself to decide Sudan's fate, to decide who is the party that should lead Sudan, and has engaged now in recent propaganda, trying to frame Sudan as a sort of extension of the Israel-Gaza conflict, as a conflict between Islamic extremists and people who want democracy, when actually it's a play for power and it's a play for influence. And unfortunately, the UAE has limitless funds and appetite, and therefore, even when there are military confrontations or military scenarios that would organically have led to a sort of negotiated solution, the support of the UAE, of the RSF, extends the war beyond its natural life. So there are drones that are being sent to the RSF. There's funding. There's mercenaries that are being funded by UAE money. So there's so many resources going into this war that is constantly extended beyond any reasonable natural conclusion that it would reach out of attrition. There is no attrition because there are limitless funds to one party. And the Sudan Armed Forces are also trying to get support from other parties like Egypt, like Saudi Arabia, to try and sort of be a bulwark against these other competing forces in Sudan. So it's devolved into a really unfortunate, unsavory carve-up.
Yeah.
Essentially, between different powers who are trying to stop competing powers to appoint or anoint their chosen party. And the Sudanese people are entirely trampled beneath these competing proxy forces, and their voices cannot reach because the propaganda and the messaging and the narrative of the war has also become filtered via these bigger, more powerful forces that are funding it.
Niemat, Nesrine mentioned earlier that you could separate out the current war, the geopolitics, the proxies, from the ongoing historic violence, the violence for violence sake, I think she said. Doctors Without Border, talking about Darfur, which you are very familiar with, said in May of this year that women there are at near constant risk of sexual violence. Can you tell us more about that aspect, horrific aspect to this conflict, what your group and you have had to deal with since the start of this particular phase of the conflict?
Unfortunately, when it comes to sexual and gender-based violence, it has been one of the defining features of this war. But to speak about what you quoted, Nesrine has mentioned, I think the wars are not separable, but the current war in Sudan cannot be resolved or informed without looking into the long-standing war or genocide in Darfur. It was the same leaders. It was the same policy, deliberate policy of the powerful attacking the powerless, are supported by outsiders. When there is genocide, it's not only the perpetrator, but they are the enabler. These supporters, they can vary and change from time to time, but main players in Sudan remain the same, the same tactic. And the only reason now the war expanded because the accountability for the crimes, serious international crimes that were committed in Darfur has not been implemented, or those who commit crime were not held accountable. And we also have seen the way even at national level, Sudanese themselves framing the crisis. Like, for instance, right now, they say the war between generals. And back in the days, it's the Darfuri opposition. But when you look at it, it is like a systemic killing of the powerful for those who are powerless on ethnic basis. A series of crimes. Nobody ruled the Sudan without committing atrocities or killing people, maintaining their seat. And at some point, before the International Criminal Court indictment of al-Bashir, many Sudanese would believe if you're a leader, you could do whatever you want and you walk away with impunity. That has a little bit changed, but because the accountability for the crimes in Darfur has not been pursued, because many Sudanese were seeing Bashir as someone who is a Sudanese from the other side of the aisle that they don't want to send to a foreign court. And that has emboldened the perpetrators. So just took it from the playbook of al-Bashir, that if al-Bashir can do that and get away, then they will do. The same rape has been used as a weapon of war in Darfur. When the war erupted this time around on April 15th of 2023, the first case reported was in Khartoum, was a case of rape of a 12-year-old girl. These women have been abducted in masses. Both report of the UN panel of experts and the fact-finding mission confirmed that sexual slavery, abduction, and mass rape and mutilation have been used against women. Ethnically motivated rape in the case of Masali, the Darfur, and the Gawa, indigenous African in Darfur, sometimes referencing that this is women should be happy that they are going to get the child of an Arab. So when you look at the trend, the only change is that this Janjaweed who used to be on camel horses, now they are having more sophisticated weapon, sophisticated cars.
Thanks to the outside
and
funding.
Unfortunately, until today, many women have yet to return home. And there has not been any serious intervention to hold the perpetrators accountable.
So you mentioned serious intervention. Nesrine, I got to ask, you have a lot of people in the West now using Sudan as a way of not talking about Gaza. Bernard-Henri Lévy recently came back from Sudan, the French author. He wrote an op-ed for the Wall Street Journal saying, it's much worse in Sudan than Gaza and the American left doesn't care. As someone who wants to see more coverage of and more attention on Sudan, how do you do that, Nesrine, while also not letting Israel supporters like Be'eshel use it for whataboutist purposes?
I mean, this is one of the biggest frustrations of trying to get attention for Sudan, is that it has been used as a tool to prove that the concern for genocide elsewhere is motivated by kind of nefarious actors. I think that the only thing we can do, the only thing we can persist in doing, is try and get the word out, keep it in the headlines, try and not also fall into the trap of pressing it into the Gaza narrative. I think people have a huge amount of bandwidth to be able to understand that other human beings are suffering elsewhere. The Gaza genocide has a slightly different element to it, which is that it is funded by taxpayers' money in European countries and in the United States. So it is a domestic issue. Sudan feels less of a domestic issue because there's less of a sort of direct stake that these countries have in Sudan. Having said that, that does not mean that people cannot be appealed to on a humanitarian basis.
Yes.
And this notion that everyone must care about every conflict in the world because it is a feature of their politics, it's disingenuous. People care about different conflicts for different reasons. And I think as far as Sudan is concerned, it is an incredibly desperate humanitarian situation. There are actually no words to describe the suffering that people are going through, and the generations upon generations of accumulated suffering, and the sort of historical deprivations and savagery that has been visited upon the Sudanese people, particularly in the West, by successive governments, including the legacy government in the Sudanese armed forces that was previously the RSS partner. And so this is not a conflict that anybody has any interest in wielding as a cudgel to scold anyone else about not caring about. It is just about making sure that these stories are told, that it's kept in the headlines, that we try and explain as much as possible that this is a human-to-human story rather than a political story, which I think Gaza is. And hope for the best. In the meantime, the funding situation is dire. The ability to raise funds for Sudan is really desperate. But when there is attention, when there are stories, when there are investigations that are printed, people do pay attention and do understand and do actually try and do something. And so I think the thing is just try not to be distracted and keep at it without getting sort of mangled in the spokes of the politicization of the war. And I find it extremely galling that Sudanese people suffer it twice. They suffer on the ground in real life, and then they suffer again when their story is taken and exploited to try and score political points without even trying to humanize Sudanese people. They just become tools. They are people. They are not narrative or argumentative tools in a broader political scuffle. And I would urge people to try and learn as much as they can about Sudan and not wait for it to be mentioned in terms of other conflicts for them to care about it. If you want to care about Sudan, you're perfectly free to do so. No one needs to tell you when or how to care about Sudan.
Well, thank you both, Nesrine and Niemat, for educating some of our viewers on the horrors of what is happening in that part of the world and the need to address it and address it urgently. We'll have to leave it there. Niemat Ahmadi, Nesrine Malik, thank you both for your time.
Thank you for having us.
Did you like this video? Don't forget to subscribe to this YouTube channel and turn on notifications. For exclusive content and to support our independent, unfiltered journalism, head over to Zeteo.com. Your support matters.